Welcome to our first 2016 webinar, so Happy New Year everyone, on the Support Anti-Terrorism by Fostering Effective Technologies Act, the Safety Act of 2002. We appreciate you taking the time from your busy schedules to join us for this presentation. Today's webinar is designed to help those of you who will be submitting a renewal application, but you'll also find some valuable information if you're a first-time Safety Act applicant. In general, a lot of the information we seek in a renewal submission is also beneficial for an initial submission. We will talk about how to prepare data during your period of designation and certification, what type of material to collect, and the specifics of the renewal process. We will also discuss the renewal application and the tools available to help you prepare during your window of designation and/or certification. We will focus on the different types of information typically submitted. Some of the OSAI staff will be available to help your questions in the chat room, but we'll also leave some time for questions before the program ends. Before we get started, I'd like to address the administrative details. If you are having trouble with the audio on your computer, you can always dial 1-517-623-4705 and use participant code 1666959. The dial-in information is on the left-hand side of the screen for reference. The slides for this webinar are available for download from the meeting session in the upper left-hand corner. It's the file called Safety Act Renewal Webinar Slides. The audio for this webinar will be available for download at www.safetyact.gov in the future, or you can always check us out on YouTube. Our previous webinars, slides and audio, also can be viewed on our website. Finally, if you have specific suggestions for future webinars, please let us know by sending an email to safetyacthelpdesk@dhs.gov or let us know in the chat room. Now I'd like to turn it over to Rachel Byrne with the DHS Office of Safety Act Implementation for a State of the Program address. Rachel?
Thanks, Laura. So I'd like to take just a few moments to recap some of our program stats. So far, since Safety Act inception, we have 809 applications that have been approved. 26 of those have been approved so far this fiscal year 2016. Contributing to over $1 billion in projected technology revenue, and over 5,000 employees have been directly related to the technology deployments. Many of these applications consist of complex, layered security systems and processes. So OSAI is off to a strong start this fiscal year, and we do not anticipate this slowing down at all. If anything, quite the opposite. Now I'd like to turn it back over to Laura.
Great, thanks Rachel. It sounds like we're off to a good start this year. So I know everyone out there, we're looking forward to your continued participation in the program so that we can hopefully incorporate you into our program stats in the next webinar. But I'd like to start off by reminding everyone listening about the purpose of the Safety Act. As part of the Homeland Security Act of 2002, Congress enacted two principal types of liability protection for the providers of the anti-terrorism technologies. That's the central purpose of the Safety Act. The Safety Act provides incentives for the development and deployment of anti-terrorism technologies by creating systems of risk management and litigation management. The reason for the Act is to ensure that the threat of liability does not deter potential manufacturers or sellers of anti-terrorism technologies from developing, commercializing, and deploying technologies that could significantly reduce the risks or mitigate the effects of large-scale terrorist events. Thus, the Act creates certain liability limitations for claims arising out of, relating to, or resulting from an act of terrorism, where a qualified anti-terrorism technology has been deployed. The Act does not limit liability for harm that may be related to deployments of the anti-terrorism technology when no act of terrorism has occurred. The Safety Act does not apply in the event of a natural disaster. It's not an all-hazards program, nor do we offer grant funding for testing. Likewise, the Safety Act does not cover an entire company or an enterprise, but only a product, service, or intellectual property produced or provided by a company. Further, the Safety Act is not a regulatory program, and your participation is completely voluntary. But because we are non-regulatory, we also don't publish specific requirements. We can only offer our best technical opinion to help applicants succeed, like we'll be doing in this webinar. We also aren't a test entity. While we ask for test data, we don't have the resources to conduct or fund your test. The Safety Act offers two types of protections, designation and certification. Each type of protection provides substantial legal and economic benefits. For example, designation caps your liability in the event of third-party claims arising from an act of terrorism, while certification provides the rebuttable presumption of the government contractor defense. These benefits, along with others, such as exclusive jurisdiction in federal court, were discussed in an earlier webinar, I believe from November 2015. So please check that out for more detail. Designation and certification typically have a 5-year span. Companies have the option to renew their designation and certification. Renewal of developmental testing and evaluation designations are addressed on a case-by-case basis. However, renewing your Safety Act protections is not a guarantee. You should be working through the lifespan of your protections to improve, collect information, and address emergent threats. I'm going to turn it back over to Rachel to talk about what's next.
Thanks, Laura. So congratulations, you've successfully completed the Safety Act process and you're now the proud professor of a Safety Act designation and/or certification. Once you have received your approval, review it carefully and be sure to respond to requests for information that follow. One request is to certify that you've obtained and will maintain the liability insurance requirements specified in your designation letter under the section Liability Insurance Required. This amount is specific to your company and is found on page 2 of your designation letter. Please respond to this request by logging on to safetyact.gov and submit on signed letterhead a statement confirming that you meet the insurance requirements specified in your designation letter. We will show you an example in a moment. Check your designation and certification for any special conditions or contours. A special condition or contour is a technical or economic reporting requirement stated in your designation or certification letter. The requirement will typically specify a schedule for supplying specific information to OSAI. Carefully review this Exhibit A technology description contained within your designation letter. This is the legal description of your technology that describes what is covered by your Safety Act protections. If you feel that there are discrepancies in what you believe was covered, contact our office immediately. And please note that you should periodically review this Exhibit A throughout the term of your designation and certification. You're responsible for notifying OSAI during the course of your protections if the description of your technology has changed. Regular updates to your technology are expected, but additions or deletions that change the technology description may require a notice of modification. Designations and certifications are typically in place for 5 years, with the option to renew those protections starting 2 years prior to the date of expiration. The date of expiration can be found in your designation letter. When you have looked up that date, mark your calendar. You should apply for renewal protections at least 6 months in advance of expiration. I emphasize at least. However, doing so 12 months in advance is preferable to allow for sufficient processing time before the protections expire. Today we're going to cover some of the common questions about the renewal process and then go over the renewal application to give you an idea of the type of information that we typically look for. Okay, so I was just talking about certifying your insurance. So we touched on this in a previous webinar as well. So you certify insurance by logging on to safetyact.gov. You submit a signed statement on your company's letterhead, confirming that you have obtained and will maintain the insurance requirements specified in your designation letter.
Great, thanks Rachel. I think some folks forget to do that, so remember, once you get your designation, certify that insurance right away. So anyway, you know me, I love to travel, and every year I try to take at least 2 weeks off to explore a different part of our country or a country overseas. For me, this is an involved process. I develop a strategy, I lay out my timeline, I collect information, and I finally execute the plan. I tend to think that preparing for a Safety Act renewal, just like preparing for any large vacation, benefits from such a strategy. Today, I want to outline that strategy with you. First, we'll go over a schedule to help you prepare your renewal and what to do while you're executing that schedule. We'll cover the types of documents and information you can collect during your designation to support a renewal application. We will spend most of our time discussing those renewal questions. And the last part of our webinar today will be an overview of the mechanics of the application process. It's a little different from submitting an initial application for designation and certification. So, let's start by talking about timelines and planning for your renewal application during the term of your designation and certification. And the first question is always going to be, when should I start? So, just like planning a large trip, early planning is important. Once I decide where I'm going, I start to think about the timelines associated with that planning. When do I buy my plane tickets? When do I get hotel rooms, etc.? Getting your designation and/or certification letters is just like picking your next vacation spot. Once you've received these letters from DHS, it's time to start planning. Sit down with your team and review the letters. They might provide guidance for where you should go next. You'll want to look at the Exhibit A, which is the legal description of your technology, the term of your designation, and the liability insurance requirement. There is an expiration date for your designation and certification. This will help you set up a schedule of events. We suggest keeping a calendar for the Safety Act and setting reminders for the major Safety Act events. The person that was designated by you as your point of contact will receive a series of reminder emails from the Office of Safety Act Implementation. You will receive 6 reminders. The first will occur 1 year after receiving Safety Act designation, and then others follow at 24, 18, 12, 6, and 3 months prior to expiration. Designate one person in your office to maintain your Safety Act calendar and to be the keeper of your Safety Act file. This person may be the one who handled your designation or certification application, or be someone new. If you designate a new person, make sure you register that person as an authorized point of contact on the Safety Act website. Otherwise, we can't speak to them about your technology, and they won't get the emails. Make sure that you have a plan to transfer Safety Act duties to someone else in the event that your designated person leaves the company. So, Rachel, you want to talk about what's next?
Yes, let's talk about keeping a Safety Act file. So I can't stress this enough. You will be hearing it a lot today. I'm sure a lot from both Laura and I. We'll talk about the types of things that can go into a Safety Act file to support a renewal application. So with the Safety Act file, you won't have to scramble to find items at the last moment to support your renewal application. This also provides a centralized repository for all information which can be easily seen, reviewed, and shared by team members. This is particularly important if someone on your Safety Act team leaves your company or is transferred. So now we're going to talk about collecting your information. So what needs to go into your file? Your file can serve as a repository for updated policies and procedures, success stories about your technology, documentation of conformance to new standards, and information from follow-on testing and evaluation. Collecting this information as you go along, similar to collecting travel ideas like Laura was speaking about, gives you a place to start once the drafting of your renewal application begins. So now we're going to talk about areas of focus. So recall that the Safety Act specifies evaluation criteria for designation and certification. The criteria is related to your ability to supply a product or service, and that product or service's effectiveness, long-term performance, and safety. A renewal application considers those criteria, but they're arranged differently. The renewal application covers technical specifications, performance, or continued anti-terrorism effectiveness, safety and insurance, and financials. So we've reviewed a number of renewal applications over the years, I would say. So we have a good idea of the type of documentation that can demonstrate each of these areas of focus. So we'll be talking about them in more detail when we go over the application questions. But first, we want to help you set a plan to collect the information and get organized. Back to you, Laura.
Great. So while your Safety Act letter is still fresh in your mind, meaning within the first 6 months or so of your designation period, take a look at the renewal application. Sit down with your team, or at least the technical insurance folks who helped in your initial application, and look at each question. Remember, every question is important. Analyze the questions with your technology in mind. Consider jotting down notes that get you thinking about what to write and what documents you need. You might pick up some ideas in the detailed instructions that accompany the application questions that will help you with the process. You might even consider a teleconference with the Office of Safety Act Implementation to discuss the strengths and weaknesses of your original application, which might provide ideas for focus as you collect your information. Thinking through the application questions and how you might answer them and what information you need to gather can help guide your document collection process throughout your designation. When you are ready to begin the renewal application process, it's time to organize your materials. Again, you'll want to assemble that team of employees and colleagues who might be able to help you answer the questions. Create a plan in order to make sure that all of the questions in the application kit are answered. If it helps, select a person who is responsible for each area of focus: technical specifications, performance, safety, insurance, or financials. Being organized isn't just about writing answers to the questions. It's about determining the information you have and outlining what you are going to do with it before you do it. One of the reasons being organized matters is that the renewal application, just like your initial Safety Act submission, is paper-based. We don't always get to see your technology or spend as much time talking to your team as we'd like. But we know that there have been a lot of talented people involved in deploying your technology. you should consider assembling a team within your organization to support the renewal application and to help determine how to answer the questions posed to you. Your experts can look at the questions, develop outlines, and help you figure out what you need to know. As you assemble this file and then organize it, you can take a few simple administrative steps that help in your drafting and our review process. For those of you who have attended some of our previous webinars, these steps will sound very familiar. That's because we have found that organized applications are easier to understand, review, and assess. These steps include numbering or lettering your attachments and exhibits, developing a table of contents or a list of attachments to accompany these exhibits, making sure your exhibits are separate electronic files or documents, making sure that your documents, particularly PDFs, are searchable, eliminating duplicated documents or files, finalizing any document change-up or markups, and making sure that the last date of review is clearly marked. And finally, they help you think about the narrative that might accompany the attachments. It is important that you tell us what you want us to understand about your attachments. Be specific. What is clear to you for a specific document might not be clear to someone unfamiliar with your process. So if you're getting these attachments from one of your team members, make sure you understand why they're important, and then make sure you'll be able to explain it to us. It might be helpful to have your team write up a summary of why each document in your Safety Act file is important, and keep that file with the document. That may actually help you write the overall responses to renewal application questions that you can submit. And it's also helpful to have someone in your company who is not familiar with the technology read your entire draft materials. The reader can tell you if the materials are clear and concise. Rachel?
Thanks, Laura. So we've talked about your Safety Act file, and we've talked around it and alluded to it, but now we actually talk about what goes into it. So we understand that every technology, every seller, and every application is going to be different. So the documents that describe your technology are all going to be unique. We know that you need to customize and tailor these documents for your needs. These are suggested categories, and as always, the list is not exhaustive. You may find that some items are more or less relevant to your technology and your company. In determining what type of material you should begin to gather in preparation for renewal, it's important that you and your team also review your previous application for designation and/or certification, together with all associated correspondence from DHS in your previous application. So this should help you focus on those same areas previously discussed as you compile your updated materials. So let's consider what's important in compiling your materials. We want to understand how your technology has performed while it has been developed or deployed during the designation, if you are updating documents that you've previously submitted, or if you have information on the successful use of your technology in the field. Keep a copy for your renewal submission. Typically, we ask for updated training materials, quality control reports, follow-on test and evaluation information, customer reviews, field performance metrics, and the like. So you can work with your customers to encourage them to collect field performance data. This may include failure rates, failure modes, service calls, false alarm information, security incidents, or even new test data. We love to see customer satisfaction surveys and testimonials. So have you or your customers participated in any field tests, emergency drills, or exercises that show your technology in action? If so, you can add any of these after-action reviews to the Safety Act file. Did you participate in tabletop exercises? The plans and reviews of those exercises are very helpful if you or your customers or other independent agencies conduct audits of your performance or inspections of your technology. The reports from those should be in your file. Because Safety Act is designed to assess anti-terrorism technologies, if your technology or your personal information involved in the prevention of detection of response to or recovery from a terrorist act during the designation, tell us. Don't hesitate to toot your own horn, as Laura likes to say it. So please note events in which your technology has performed in the same way as it would have during a terrorist attack, such as a natural disaster. So think about how you know your technology is functioning properly in the field, and then what type of documents you can provide to show us that. So tell us about your personnel. If you hired new managers, software developers, or security advisors to work on the technology, put their job descriptions and resumes in your Safety Act file, with personally identifiable information redacted, of course. We will look at how you have to continue to employ qualified personnel to deploy the technology. This type of information can help demonstrate your technology's performance over time. and your company's commitment to providing a consistent and quality service or product. So if you only apply for designation the first time around, you may not have to address the safety of your technology. This depends on the technology type, however. A question on safety is specifically asked in the certification application, but with renewal applications, we want to make sure that you have identified any safety hazards that may relate to your technology and that you've taken steps to mitigate them. Gather any safety or hazard reports you have, incident reports, any information you submit to OSHA to describe the safety of your company throughout the year. If there's been any worker compensation claims pertaining to your technology, put it in your file. Have any of your customers brought a lawsuit against you? If possible, describe the basis of that lawsuit or those lawsuits and the outcome. Every time you renew your liability insurance or any other insurance, place a copy of the updated policies and documents in your Safety Act file. Every year when you file your taxes or your 10K, place a copy of that in your file, along with your technology revenues and your financial information.
Great, that was a lot of good information, Rachel. So let's take a look at one of the renewal questions to give you an idea of how you can map out your response and then all that documentation that you talked about. If you participated in our last webinar, this process will look familiar to you. We think it's a valuable exercise, which is why we put an example here. We selected renewal application item RE 6.1, safety. The sample technology we are going to use for this question is the provision of unarmed security officers to a community college campus. We'll cover the other questions in the latter part of this webinar. I begin my map by looking at the question, what does safety mean for my unarmed security guards? I started my map by looking at the keywords in the question. Have I done a safety and hazards analysis for this type of service? What risks do security officers face, and how can I mitigate these risks? I look through my policies to make sure that the officers receive the appropriate training and that my use of force policy is clear, concise, and has been regularly reviewed and updated. How do I make sure that my unarmed security officers are providing a quality, safe service consistently throughout the campus every day? Since designation, have there been any emergency exercises on campus? Have there been any serious incidents? What documentation can I offer to demonstrate that my company has used these events to identify any deficiencies and to make corrections? Is there a written policy directing my employees to complete after-action reports, to document incidents, and to document incident reviews? What process did I use such that my reports to make decisions my reports are used to make decisions about the program? Some samples of updated post orders can show how I consider safety and quality at each guard post. Incident and OSHA reports can show how the safety policies have been implemented. What industry practices do I follow when I recruit, hire, and screen and train and manage my security officers? I can also attach my updated emergency plans for active shooter response, suspicious items or persons, and bomb threats, just to name a few. Do I have to worry about certain environmental issues? Finally, I have to think about my personnel. What are their qualifications? How would I go about hiring, and what's my policy on that? So that's the general process I go through to analyze the question and provide the details then that would be specific to my technology. And really that leads into our next topic, which is that a good outline can help you out a great deal. When I work on a travel plan, I outline what types of things I want to do, when I want to do them, and what that might look like. So building on my safety question example, on the screen, you see a conceptual outline that I might use to organize resources and my thoughts to answer the question. As you can see, I focused on the two main aspects of my question map. My outline includes four things, four types of information that I might want to write about, like the use of force policy and the training of that policy, the names of people who will provide the information, and documents I might need to supply. If you look at the third bullet under practices, you can see I've used my outline to identify a document I don't have, namely an updated plan. The purpose of writing an outline is to really think about what you want to do and say before you say it, and to help make sure you have your references identified prior to writing. So I think we're going to look at a little more of the renewal questions in detail.
Time for renewal questions. Okay, so now we're going to talk about the information and documentation you can provide in response to the renewal questions. So we'll look at some of this information that can support different types of technologies. The first three main questions on the on the renewal application are administrative and clerical. Respond to all items in the renewal application form. If needed, provide updated seller and point of contact information. Also, remember, the big picture with renewals. In your original submission, we asked you to tell us the story of your technology as it existed at that time. Your expertise, how you tested your technology, how you developed your procedures. Consider your renewal application the next volume in the story. But now, we're seeking information to see how you have progressed since then. So technical specifications. This relates to item RE4 in the renewal application. The intent of this item is to provide an understanding of what, if anything, has changed about your technology since your designation. Changes may also have occurred from the most recently approved notice of modification. If you're making substantial technology changes during the course of your protections, please contact your office as to whether a notice of modification should be filed. Remember, your technology is defined in the Exhibit A technology description in your designation and/or certification. That description defines your technical specifications, your technology, and the scope of our original evaluation. Further, that technology description describes the scope of your Safety Act protections. We look at various categories of technologies for the Safety Act. This includes services, products, software, and intellectual property. So your specific needs may differ from our discussion, but just remember that these are all general points of the renewal process. Feel free to call us if you have specific questions about your technology. As we've noted earlier, you should also review your previous application for designation and certification, as well as the attachments you submitted. So, any correspondence, as we noted earlier, from DHS during that original evaluation is also good to review. Comparing these documents to your technology as it exists today can help you focus on your answers for the renewal questions. So consider if your policies have been updated or changed. If you have any new models that use the same basic principles as those included in the Exhibit A. If you have major version changes to your technology, or if your training has changed, or if you implement new methodologies or algorithms, or the requirements or qualifications for your personnel have changed, and have you changed your manufacturing process. Any one of these items, if it is substantial, may constitute a change in the technical specifications of your Exhibit A. So remember as you go along, the Safety Act requires you to notify our office prior to your renewal if a substantial change has taken place in the technology. A substantial change is one that changes the nature or the scope of the technology as previously evaluated. So contact us before you submit a renewal application if your technology has undergone a major change to the technology description, or if maybe that description is no longer applicable. So for lesser changes or updates, we know that and we understand that in 5 years, a lot can change. So people move on, products can be introduced or discontinued, software is almost constantly evolving, and new threats may emerge that you need to address. So you may have had to select new components due to obsolescence or new vendors because of business changes. That's why the next item, RE 4.1, is so important. It specifically addresses changes to your technology.
Great. As Rachel mentioned, most technologies do not remain static. It is expected that all applicants have made updates to account for emergent threats and or for newer revised standards or industry best practices. We will be looking for information that documents how you've adapted your technology to account for these types of changes. In responding to this item, please don't simply say that no changes have been made. Even if you don't need to alter the scope of your technology or your Exhibit A, something has probably changed at least a little in 5 years. The next slide addresses some of the common changes, and I want to walk through those. So it's helpful to begin by using your Exhibit A from 5 years ago as a baseline and compare this to the technology as you currently provide it. Highlight any new additions and strike any elements that you may no longer provide. In your narrative, please explain all changes that have been made, including those that are listed in the Exhibit A and those that are only reflected in your processes. If changes are needed to the Exhibit A, you will need to attach a proposed updated version of this document and show us the amendments. The types of changes could include things like the addition of a seller, or updates to a software version, or minor changes in your processes. If you've added a new model, a new software version, or provided a new service component, you just remember that you're going to need to provide information to support its capability, safety, effectiveness, and deployment history. Have you tested the new components for the overall system? Have you assessed it with the same rigor and quality that you used on the models in new designation? Are your processes still consistent? So let me give you an example of a clear narrative. So hopefully you can see on screen an example of a narrative that works very well and isn't all that long. Sometimes quantity is not as important as clarity and quality. So this is meant to represent a response to item RE 4.1 of the application kit and addresses a common problem, which is a response that simply says, no changes with no other description or reference to supporting documents. For this purpose, we are going to assume that you produce an X-ray detector. In your original Exhibit A, only the X5 model was listed, and in your renewal application response, you have simply said that there are no changes with no other description or reference to the supporting documents. However, when we review your submission, we note that you supplied a data sheet for an additional X-ray detector model, the X6. Although the data sheet seems to show that the X6 uses the same basic sensors as the X5, we will have uncertainties in your technical specifications because we won't know if they've changed. In this case, more information will be necessary. This can be avoided with a narrative response such as, since designation, we've added a new model, the X6 X-ray detector, which is based on the underlying sensor technology for our X5 X-ray detector. Attachment 1 is the technical data sheet for the X6. Attachments 2, false alarms, and 3, reliability, are test reports for the X6. We have also modified our software development process for the system software provided by the X-ray detectors. The process was originally an incremental development, but we have migrated to an agile software development process. The software development lifecycle process document is attached in attachment 4 of this application. That discussion right there tells us a lot about how the quality of your technology has been maintained. First, it tells us that you have a process for product improvement, that you've evaluated your software process and decided you needed a more adaptive method. It also shows us your development history. Second, it tells us that you have assessed the new model for its effectiveness to determine if it performs like the X5. That discussion is supported by documentation. But note how the narrative discussion provides the context for your documents and helps you determine how much information to supply. Use your narrative to help you determine how many documents to provide. And as we noted before, this is a paper review, so please make your discussions as clear as possible. Remember that we are able to consult with you on the type and depth of information needed prior to the submission of your application. And please take us up on that.
All right, so now we're going to talk about substantial changes. As noted earlier, you should monitor your technology through the duration of your designation and certification and work with us to determine if a notice of modification is needed prior to your renewal. Call us, we're always available. Bigger changes, like the addition of a new product model or the extension of the technology into a different market sector, are best handled in the notice of modification process. Make sure your response is clear, concise, and easy for a person not familiar with your technology to understand. Is the description factual? Does it describe what the technology actually represents now? Are all the components and elements described? Remove embellishments, flowery language, marketing language, hype, technical jargon. Don't use unsubstantiated phrases, such as the best or the most effective or safest. Take a step back and review it from an outside perspective. So now we're going to talk about conforming to specifications. Sometimes sellers have difficulty responding to this item, RE 4.2. What does conformance really mean? Well, it can mean different things to different types of technology. Basically, we're seeking information that demonstrates that you're still providing the same technology in the same way that you were when we last reviewed it, or that any updates are within your industry's standards of care. Typically, in addressing this item, you should provide a narrative response to the question and support your answer with attachments from your compiled Safety Act file. Items that you should include are updated technical specifications and/or policy and procedure documentation, updated company history and corporate structure as related to the current sellers, updated brochures and manuals relating to your technology, its deployment, and its capabilities, certificates supporting continued compliance to recognized standards, for example, industry, national, or government standards, recent versions of quality assurance or quality control plans relating to manufacturing, deployment, and/or services can support this. Going into performance, RE5. Performance is addressed in RE5, the renewal application. The intent of this item is to allow our office to gain an understanding of your technology's deployments over the course of designation and performance during such deployments. So we're back to your Safety Act file. The information you've collected during your designation can help you answer the questions about performance. This may vary depending on the type of technology that you provide. Part of the Safety Act application asks you to demonstrate the ability of your technology to perform its anti-terrorism mission and show how it is effective in doing so. This is a chance for you to talk about your successes. You might do this through deployment history with customers who will provide feedback to us about using your technology. And as I've noted, we want to know about your successes, but also any potential performance issues or shortfalls can also help us understand your technology too. So for example, if your product needed to be redesigned after a pilot test, or if your processes were refined following an exercise, tell us about it. That shows us that your overall policies are working. You respond to challenges and you address problems to make sure your technology functions. That's great. We want to know about it, so tell us about it.
Great. So moving on to RE 5.1 deployments. So when you start to look at this item, you should be able to address the following question. How have your deployment patterns changed since your initial application? We want to understand to whom, when, and where your technology has been sold, used, or fielded since you received designation. New customer information or details of expanded deployments and contracts can be added to your Safety Act file. If your deployments have decreased for any reason, we want to know about that as well. Have you maintained the same contract since last review? Keep in mind, does your technology have multiple components, models, supporting technologies or other services? If so, make sure you provide the details of which components were deployed for each customer. We want to know the customers who's purchased or acquired the technology, the duration of your customers' deployments, and the time frame, along with any current contract information for the deploying agency. If any of the deployments have been used for anti-terrorism purposes, please provide the documentation to support this. It's especially important to provide contact information for these deployments. One of the most common things I end up asking is for more complete deployment information. That's why we suggest you complete a table like the one at the bottom of the screen. If you have an extensive deployment history, you can provide a sample of deployments. We can work with you to figure out what a good sample size is. You just need to call us. And I can't rave about tables enough. We do love them, so please include one if you can. So for the purposes of the next two items of the renewal application, we refer to the efficacy or operational performance of your technology. We are simply differentiating it from Criterion 7 of the Safety Act designation evaluations and highlighting that it refers to the successes of your technologies during the designation. We want to know all about your good performances. So, call your customers. People who use your technology or contract with you to provide services are a great resource for us. They can give us an idea of how they use your technology, why they continue to use it, and what its performance has been like for them. Again, because we are performing a paper evaluation, these users serve as our eyes and ears in the field. When responding to these questions, remember to be clear, concise, and refer to your supporting documents with a narrative description. Attach your examples of fielded performance data. Explain what these examples show us. Other ways to show successes include incident reports from things that aren't terrorism related, but might show the performance of your technology. For example, maybe you have installed a chemical sensor that picked up an accidental spill of cleaning supplies. Or maybe your security guards stopped a robber or responded to a medical emergency. Case studies of success, backed with incident reports and customer testimonials, can demonstrate performance during your designation window. Our next few slides will describe some of the specific information that can help the evaluation of different types of technologies. And I think we're going to start with products, and Rachel's going to take it away.
So for products, evidence of performance is pretty straightforward. We want to know how each model of the product performs in the field. Any new field testing can help answer this question. So one of the main questions we tend to ask is for information on efficacy for all the various products of your models. If you do not have data for one version because it's so similar to another one, you should just clearly explain that while testing of one model might apply to another. You can also explain why your older testing is still relevant. Other things that might help us understand effectiveness is user experience. Who are your end users? How do they use it, or how do you anticipate that they use it? One, what they can tell us about your product's performance in the intended operational environment. How does quality control work? Case studies or after-action reports of the technology's implementation during exercises or actual incidents can help us to understand how the technology was used during your designation. So now I'm going to go into services. We mentioned that we would like to see updated policies, plans, and procedures, as well as updated training that you provide your personnel. We can use updated post orders from a representative sample of your deployments from the designation period to understand the efficacy of your services. So make sure to keep really good records of your training and certifications of your personnel. And add them to your Safety Act file and make sure that you use them in response to RE 5.2 and RE 5.3 to show that you're following your updated policies. So for services, this can be shown by documenting the measures taken to ensure all of your employees are following your policies and procedures. Additionally, if you participate in emergency exercises, conduct audits, spot check employees, and the like, you should document your findings or results. This type of information can help support continuous training and improvement. You can also use incident reports from your Safety Act file that are not terrorism related, as Laura mentioned before, to show that your people and procedures work. So for example, responding to a medical emergency or a natural disaster might show your ability to respond in a crisis and to ensure that your procedures are actually followed. So they also provide after-action review materials that show your process for updating. Similarly, responses to criminal activity might also provide this data. So in our experience, it's best not to rely solely on your points of contact to describe the performance of your technology throughout your period of designation. We understand that sometimes that's the easiest way to go about that and to show that your technology has been effective, but we want to know how you know that your technology is performing as intended. So I encourage all of our service providers to visit our Safety Act webinar on the 4 Ps. We did this previously a couple years ago maybe. People, process, procedure, and performance. So that webinar can help you more clearly understand the types of things we look at during the initial designation application and the renewal process. All of our previous webinars can be found on safetyact.gov by clicking on the See More Materials link under the heading Printer-Friendly Materials.
Great, thanks. So our last type of technology is really software-based technologies, or those technologies that have a software component. And much like service-based technologies, we want to know that processes are functioning the way they're designed. So what types of testing might have been conducted on the most recent production version of a cybersecurity technology? Have you done factory testing, site acceptance testing, full-up system tests? Sometimes the normal course of business might give you effectiveness information. Do you have a site acceptance test before delivering a software package or an integrated system? Great. Give us the plan and the customer acceptance document. That's evidence of your performance. We know that no one is perfect. So how do your customers tell you about bugs or software issues they find? How do you track them? When you've determined that a bug needs to be corrected, how do you change the software or configuration to address it? Then, how do you know that the correction doesn't mess with any of the other parts of the technologies? Have you had any third parties conduct independent testing? What about independent validation and verification, IV&V? Have you addressed any recommended changes? How do you protect your data, your customers' data, and your network from cyber attacks and hacking? This is an area of high visibility and of interest, so pay special attention to demonstrating how you maintain information security. How do you find and address any vulnerabilities in your software applications? All of this information can be very helpful. So, as I've mentioned a couple times, we know you're not perfect, your employees aren't perfect, and we certainly aren't perfect. I know, and I'm not at least. We do know, and we don't want you to be afraid of that. We know that there's challenges you've faced since your designation. Your mistakes, problems, and performance issues can help us understand your technology too. For example, if your product needed to be redesigned after your designation, or if your processes were fine following an exercise, tell us. For example, high employee turnover can occur in the security guard industry. Averages can be as high as 100% annually in some areas. What's important to us is that you recognize this and address it. Areas like defined initial and annual training can offset turnover, changes in threat, or changes in client requirements. Also, sometimes our procedures don't work out in the face of an incident. How do you learn from events and exercises? How do you document your findings, and what do you do with those findings to make yourself better? Don't be afraid to show us your warts, We all grow and change based on experience, and we expect that you will as well. That shows us that your overall policies are working. You respond to challenges and address problems to make sure your technology functions. Item RE6 talks about safety. As we discussed a few slides back, the intent of this item is to allow our office to gain an understanding of the safety of your technology when used as intended, and of any safety-related incidents that might have occurred during its deployment. Some of you may not have addressed safety in your original application, especially those of you who did not apply for certification. However, this may also look familiar to some of our service providers who need to address safety as part of their effectiveness evaluation. We're going to try and talk about both parts of our audience, so hang with us.
Okay, so item RE 6.1, your safety policy. Safety, as we all know, is a key component for all renewal applications. We want any information you have that is related to the safety of your technology, not only for its operation and field deployments and users, but also for anyone who may come in contact with the technology. So we want to understand how you view safety as part of your technology. Your updated training, emergency plans, evacuation plans, quality management documents, company safety policy, or post orders can help demonstrate the safety of your technology. If you have conducted any new hazard analysis, updated your policies and procedures to mitigate the evolving threat environment, or change your training, as we have said over and over, you can attach and describe those policies to us. Security services might also have inherent safety issues, so address them. A canine unit might, for example, have issues with bites, or working around explosives, or interaction with a potentially volatile public. This can be overcome with training, retraining, and oversight. So for products, you can submit any updated manuals that show how you tell your users about the safety hazards involved with the technology. These might be radiation, electrical shock, moving parts, heavy items, fire, or hazardous chemicals. If you cover these hazards in your user training, submit that too. What we don't like to see is a sentence stating the technology is inherently safe. Sure, some types of technologies may be inherently safe, such as software applications or intellectual property. But for most technologies, there is at least one or two risks to users, maintainers, the general public, and your personnel. So we're pretty sure that in your development and the past 5 years of deployments, you have evaluated these and addressed them to some degree. So just explain to us how you might mitigate safety risks. Some of those risks you may have to accept, like the risk of bites or explosives, but you can take steps to minimize any harm from those risks. So RE 6.2, safety reports. Responding to this item, you may describe how you ensure your technology is safe for use as intended. If any safety-related incidents have occurred, you should describe any actions taken in response to those incidents. Supporting attachments might include up-to-date post-deployment safety and hazard reports, and recent certificates supporting compliance with recognized safety standards. For example, industry or regulatory standards. Check the list of reports that are on the slide for other examples. We also ask you about any litigation that's been brought against you regarding the technology. If you aren't permitted to talk about it in detail, we certainly understand that, but we'd like you to explain, if you can, what happened. You should also direct us to the case numbers or court proceedings if these are publicly available. So we do our own searches of public records, legal proceedings, and other databases, but we'd like to hear about it from your perspective.
Great, thanks Rachel. Well, last but not least, in case you forgot what I said way back at the beginning, the Safety Act is a risk and liability management tool. Therefore, we need you to answer all the insurance and financial questions in the renewal submission. This is another one that folks sometimes forget. You should provide us with up-to-date information on your current insurance policies or policies that would provide coverage for third-party claims arising from, relating to, or resulting from an act of terrorism involving your technology. Please answer all the application questions relating to insurance. Please note that if you have more than one policy that applies, please provide separate answers for each policy. Put them in a table. We love tables. If your policy will expire during the evaluation period, please give us an updated information about the renewed policy or policies when it becomes available. Sometimes during the course of a renewal application, we will ask you to supply additional insurance quotes. If that's the case, remember the following. If you have an insurance policy that just happens to exclude terrorism, the easiest step to take is to get a quote to add coverage under the Terrorism Risk Insurance Act, TRIA, to that policy. If you can't get a TRIA quote, or just think that that quote is too expensive, you can always get quotes for an entirely new policy that would respond to a potential Safety Act claim. We recommend you get quotes for multiple limits of coverage. For example, 1 million, 5 million, and 10 million is a good place to start. Remember, for any quote, make sure you ask your broker or insurance company to assume that your technology will receive Safety Act protections. We also ask that all applicants supply your most recent financial statements, income statement, balance sheet, and statement of cash flows. If the primary named insured for your insurance program is an entity other than your company, such as a parent company, provide the parent company's most recent financial statements, income statement, balance sheet, statement of cash flows, all work. Finally, we also ask you to provide revenue projections. These projections are solely related to the sales of the technology and shouldn't include any revenues you expect to earn from any other products or services. If the technology is not revenue producing, perhaps because it's employed internally or as part of a bundled offering like venue security for patrons, that's okay. Just let us know that and then provide the technology's cost projections instead. Whether you're providing revenue or cost data, you should provide the actual revenue earned or the cost incurred for deploying the technology in the most recent completed fiscal year, a projection figure for your current fiscal year, as well as for each of the following 2 fiscal years, for a total of 3 years of projections. So now let's talk about the mechanics of creating your renewal application. It's pretty straightforward, but we want to go over it quickly to make sure you know what to look for when you go through the process on your own. Great, so step 1. Using the account related to your original designation and certification, you will want to log in and create a renewal. This link will only be available after your designation and/or certification becomes eligible for renewal. This is normally 2 years before the expiration date, but you should check your designation and certification letters just to be sure. Rachel, step 2?
All right, so step 2. By clicking on that Create Renewal link, you'll be able to access the technology that's available for renewal. Note that if you have multiple technologies with Safety Act protections, congratulations, there might be multiple applications that you have to choose from. So click on the link for your technology that you want to renew, and you'll be able to open up the application eligible for renewal and start to create your submission. All right, so step 3. Once you open the application eligible for renewal, you should click on the Create Renewal link under the Actions menu. After you've done that, you'll get a pop-up window asking you to verify that if you want to create a renewal, simply say OK, and success. You've created a successful draft renewal submission.
Awesome. That seems pretty straightforward, but if it's not, call our help desk. Start then by answering all the questions and repeat, really answer all the questions. If you don't answer all the questions, it's tough for us to start the evaluation process, so make sure that nothing is skipped. As you answer all the questions, try not to repeat the same answers over and over again, because each question is unique. Organizing your thoughts and supporting documentation before completing the application form will help you avoid repetition. Next, reference your attachments in your answers. Tell us why they're important in answering the question. If you aren't referencing an attachment, ask yourself if it's really necessary to provide it at all. Finally, quality is more important than quantity. In a prior life, I used to tell my students that they weren't Charles Dickens and no one got payment for word counts. You can be precise while being succinct, and you can be, clear without being verbose. Avoid flowery language, marketing terms, jargon. We know you're the experts, but we want to understand your answers too. So one of the best ways to make sure that you aren't making mistakes that will lead to an incomplete application is by using the Safety Act Help Desk. Informal consultations allow us to have discussions with you to help us fine-tune everything. It lets us understand your business operations and service offerings in the last 5 years and helps us identify documents that will be critical. Finally, again, please answer all the questions. It's never helpful for us to say that information is available upon request. If you think you should provide it and you think it'd be important, just make sure you provide it. So once you've finished your answers and maybe talk to our office, if you have all your questions resolved, just refine your submission and give it one last check. Proofread to make sure that you've answered all the questions, recurring theme here, and that everything makes sense to an outside reader. Check to make sure you can open the attachments and that they're all readable, and edit to make sure that you aren't being repetitive. Also, take off track changes. We typically send them back to you if you have track changes left on, so please make sure you do that. You might want to do what I call a white glove review. Have one last single reviewer on your team pretend they're us. Do they understand what you're trying to do? And last, there you're ready. A quick slide here. Hit submit. We're ready to take a look at it. So let me turn it over to Rachel.
Just remember to keep in touch with us. In addition to a consultation process, we have a number of resources available on our website. I've noted webinars, so has Laura, that might be of use, but I'd also like to point you to our FAQs. Our FAQs have a lot of information that might be of value when troubleshooting your submission.
All right.
We both want to thank you so much for joining our webinar today.
Yeah, thanks, Rachel. And I think we'll ask Amy if there's any questions on the line, and I'll see if there's anything
Questions in the chat room?
That might need to be answered. Amy, any questions on the phone?
Yes, ma'am. We'll now begin the question and answer session of today's conference. To ask a question, please press star followed by the number 1. Unmute your phone and record your name clearly. Your name will be required to introduce your question. To withdraw your request, you may press star and then 2. Once again, that's star 1 to ask a question. One moment, please, for questions to queue.
All right, well, it doesn't, oh, wait. How can we get a copy of the recording of today's overview? So the slides are available for download on the upper left-hand side, I want to say, and the audio will be available probably in the next 48 to 72 hours on our website at www.safetyact.gov. And I believe, actually, if you search Safety Act on YouTube.
We're on YouTube now.
We're on YouTube. We're pretty cool. And you can follow, also plug, you can follow the DHS Science and Technology Directorate on Twitter as well. So there's information resources available out there. I think someone else is typing, which maybe, oh, I'm also supposed to point out that DHS S&T also is on Facebook. I did not even know this.
Yes, we are.
So yeah, so Facebook. Safety Act doesn't have its own Facebook page yet because I don't think we're that hip. But definitely check out the S&T Safety Act or the S&T Facebook page. Question. Yeah, everything, so the question is, did everything we discuss apply to certification renewals? Absolutely. So the renewal application is actually agnostic to designation or certification. Yep. So everything we said totally applies to certification applications as well. Okay,
you have better eyes than I do.
Yeah, I'm trying to read this here. I think we might have time for 1 or 2 more questions. Is the information that is submitted in support of an application? I'm gonna guess and say this is a question about yes, confidential is the information support question. Yes. So everyone here is under a large stack of non-disclosure and conflict of interest statements. Were actually prohibited by federal law and punishable up to jail time for disclosing any trade secrets. We take that very seriously.
We can't even talk about the fact that you've submitted an application.
Yeah.
And so, not to worry, everything's confidential.
Okay. Amy, anybody on the phone?
We're showing no questions in the queue at this time.
All right.
Okay, great.
So I think that's probably all we've got time for anyway. It's 2:30. So,
I mean, any other questions, you can always call our Safety Act support line as well as our help desk. Our support line is 202-254-8637.
All right, great.
Thanks, everyone.
Thanks, everyone.